Right at 2:30. What you got?
We are ready to
On
go.
time and ready
On
to go.
time.
All
Ready
right,
to rock
it
and roll.
is our favorite time of the week. It is Monday at 2:30. We do our industry update. The team leaders share the awesome opportunity to just sit here and pour into our agents. So Toya, it's been a while, so why don't you introduce yourself to everybody so they know who you are?
Awesome. So I am Toya Stevenson, team leader in South Fulton. So if you're ever passing by the airport, just come by and say hello.
Awesome. Well, I think Rick will be joining us here shortly. I mean, industry update, what's your feeling before we get into specific data? What's your feeling? It's October, it's starting to get cold. A lot of times we'd say the market got cool, but I don't know. What are you feeling?
I am feeling that the market is still incredibly hot. We are still seeing sales outpace month over month. So it's still a good time to buy and sell. Hasn't slowed down too much, but we are definitely seeing some good solid sales and activities going on in our market.
Perfect. Well, let's get some numbers up here and let's talk, and then we'll jump into our articles. So obviously, if you're on the call last week, we used to track the numbers as a general whole for FMLS, and we've been tracking these since March. And to my unknowingly dismay, we found out that FMLS had been timing us out on 5,000 responses. So they weren't exact numbers. So we pivoted, Toya, last week, and we decided to just start tracking by county.
Handsome.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think that's somebody else.
That's all good. So we started tracking by county, and we started doing this last week. And so here's Fulton County, and these are real specific numbers. So last week, the 7-day total in Fulton County was 836 listings. This week, there's 732. Little dip in listings, right?
Yeah.
Active under contract went up 10%, which is good. Yep. And our pendings went down 10%, which is nothing here to jump up and down around. And then same thing with closings, right? So if you look at our graphs, we only got 2 data points right now. The graphs will get much more rich as we go through in the specific counties. But out of Fulton County, what are we hearing? What are we feeling?
So, I think Fulton County, it's you take North Fulton, South Fulton, and I don't know if this is just exclusively looking at Fulton County as a whole. But I would say you always have those little small communities that are going to definitely outpace the market, and then some that are just going to be in line with the market. So not anything unusual.
The way if you look at Fulton County on a map, it's probably the one county that doesn't make the most sense, and whoever drew it needed to have some sense talked into them, but we'll go with it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so DeKalb County, 437 new listings last week, 406 this week, 271, 281 pendings, and then 317, 305. Here's what I'm going to say. Those are strong numbers for a county, and they're staying strong, yep. Which typically we deal with a seasonality in the traditional bell curves. And normally we would see the trend going down at this time of year, not in a bad way, just that less houses typically sold in October than they did in June, right? But we're actually seeing it stay pretty strong going into this fourth quarter, which I think is a great thing from a leadership perspective, because normally we'd be having conversations with real estate agents saying, hey, did you do well with your money in your planning and making sure you save for a rainy day, because June you're going to make a whole lot of money, you might not make as much money in January, but right now we're not even having to have those conversations because the market's saying so strong, right?
And I love that. And, also we find that most times our real estate professionals are taking off. They're trying to get into the holiday season that's coming in. So right now, the market is keeping them busy. That's a good thing.
Yep. So what we did is we're breaking it down by county. And obviously on this call, if we went county by county, it'd take a long time.
Yep.
I think the three big counties obviously are Fulton, DeKalb, and Cobb. And you can kind of see 417 new listings in Cobb, 423, it actually went up. Two pending stayed the same and closings went up, right?
Yep.
So those are good. But here's what we're going to do, Toya, and I'm going to put it in the chat. And I see Rick jumped on. Somebody in our organization said we need to go buy a website that everybody can just go to and get this data. So we bought therealestatestats.com. And if you go to the website, therealestatestats.com, it'll take you straight to this spreadsheet. You can click on the county you want and get all the data you want as we continue to track it. So certainly I see a couple people popping on. Therealestatestats.com will publish it. But at the end of the day, I certainly like showing residential leasing. I think it's important to understand this metric when you're talking to investors. I see everybody jumping on the spreadsheet now.
Yeah, I love it.
And the residential leasing is important just to be able to be a consultant to people that are looking to build wealth in real estate. And I'll let everybody kind of play with that. But Rick, Toya, what do we want people to know about the numbers?
I think it's power in numbers. I think the numbers tell the story that you don't have to tell. It's third-party information. It's relevant, and it really gives you a good depiction of what's happening right here in your market. I think sometimes our consumers hear what's happening on a national level, and they think that that's what's happening in their market. So utilizing these statistics really show optimism in the market so people can continue to want to sell and buy. But it really does give you a true idea of what's happening in your backyard.
Yeah, and there's a reason we track it on a weekly basis. It's because the market, historically, we tracked it on a past 30 days basis, saying, here's what happened in September. And when the markets start to move quickly, 30 days in the past is old news, and it's not good data for our agents to be consultants to the consumer, right? Like having that data right then and there over a past 7 days stat really kind of keeps us as close to the market as possible to make great consulting conversations. Rick, what would you add?
It does. And the biggest challenge is just that, the reporting cycles and the lagging data that gets input or documented in the FMLS does skew the numbers a bit. But, one of the observations I made is, upon your recognition that, hey, we were making a mistake. We weren't getting the entire data pool before. When you broke it down by county and you analyze the overlay, it's amazing how consistent the data is, almost irrelevant of not having all of it. In other words, that sample size, I believe, held water in terms of the story and of the number of actives, withdrawn, expired. And I think the context was accurate. We just didn't know the data set we were working with was inaccurate until you noticed. And anyway, I like it broken down by county because it's still a micro conversation.
And I appreciate you being kind, because I was pretty embarrassed when I figured that out. I was like, man, we've been doing this 7 months, and I realized
Brett,
FMLS was cutting me off at 5,000. So
are you human? What's going on here?
I was about to say.
We did talk about that this week on Mojo Monday. All right, Toya, I'm going to kick this next conversation to you.
Awesome.
FHA and VA, and sellers are really have been shunning this mortgage product for a while now. And I got to say, I'm in more and more conversations around deals that have FHA and VA loans in the last 30 days than I've been in the last 7 to 10 months. And I think it's starting to come back, but not everybody understands the difference. And once you enlighten us.
So, I always say, and these are the conversations that we're having in our sales meeting, as real estate professionals, we have to educate ourselves on the differences between products and what we're actually advising our clients to look at. So when we're looking at FHA and VA offers, and I thought this was an interesting article in Inman, because they first started by saying, you know what, we're not taking them because if it appraises and the appraisal comes back too low, then that means we have to go back and renegotiate. And you do not have to do that. As a matter of fact, I invited Chandra, who's with Contour Mortgage, because she probably has a little bit more insight, but there is a difference that people can pay. It's just that FHA and VA are only going to finance what the home appraised for. It still doesn't mean that you can't have that gap appraisal and they can come to the table, the closing table, with money. The other part is appraisals, with the inspection period. So I think a lot of times we're seeing no contingencies on due diligence, no inspection contingency, all of those things. And they're worried that if it goes FHA or VA, we have to have those appraisals in there. Those inspection periods in there. And you do, but they're very seller friendly. And I'm going to just ask Chandra. Chandra, do you want to chime in on that just for a few minutes in terms of from a lender's perspective with FHA and VA?
Hello, sure. I can definitely add to that. One of the things that I wanted to definitely, Toya, the article is kind of, misleading, because you are correct. As a FHA loan, they are allowed to pay above the appraisal value. FHA or the lender will not lend above that, but the seller can pay whatever they want to pay for it above it. They just have to come with additional cash to the table to be able to do that. So, it makes it seem like you can't, but you can. And they don't put a limit to say, you can't pay X amount over, because we've been doing it in this market. So that's number one. And then the article is kind of confusing, because it looks like sometimes he says appraisal, and then sometimes it talks about inspections. And there's a difference between the inspection, which a seller does on their own for their own sanity, that they're getting, the property and what it has, versus the appraisal. And from the lender perspective, if it's FHA or conventional, we are still going to require an appraisal be done. And even if you don't have any contingencies, if there are things that have to be fixed on the conventional side, those things still have to be fixed by the lender, no matter what, before the lender is going to loan. So, just because you don't put in a contingency, somebody still has to fix it before you can move forward with a conventional loan as well. So it's not like you just, you can just ignore the appraisal, because the lender is still going to require an appraisal to be done.
Gotcha.
And I think where the article goes down is it says it was really designed because it's a government-backed loan to quote unquote protect the consumer, right? Around buying a property that was overvalued or buying a property that wasn't in great condition. But this is our industry update for our agents. So they're the ones having the conversation at the kitchen table with the seller, going, hey, here's a conventional offer. Here's an FHA offer that may even be paying more than a conventional offer, but the seller gets scared of that FHA loan, right? And how do we advise our agents to be able to best advise a seller in that conversation?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say my perspective from a lender perspective, and this article doesn't address it, or maybe it does a little bit. We found from the lending side that consumers are assuming that because someone has a conventional loan, that they're more likely to close than somebody with an FHA, that they have a better credit score, and there's going to be less issues. And that's not necessarily the case, because sometimes people can qualify, but for different reasons. It may be because FHA allows the loan, the value to be higher. So it's typically around 50%. Debt to income ratio, where you get a higher debt to income ratio on FHA. Sometimes it's because of student loans, because student loans treated in the debt to income ratio are treated differently with one loan versus the other. So there may be a multiple reasons of why someone chooses one loan type over the other. So it's considered from our perspective, redlining and kind of discrimination to not, to pick a conventional loan over FHA just because of the loan type. So for agents, if they're seeing that, to challenge the listing agent to say, why are you not considering FHA loans? And there are some reasons why, which may be, I know, when it comes to a FHA loan, that you have the 90-day anti-flip. So that may be one reason why. But outside of some of those legitimate reasons, I think it's unfair to the FHA buyers for them not to consider them, especially if they're bringing more, their offer is higher than a conventional loan. So that they're making sure that it's fair and not, automatically throwing out, if they're FHA or if they're VA loan.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. And obviously we're not gonna be able to do a full training class here to go through everything, but certainly if you find yourself in a situation where you're comparing different options at a listing table, I think just automatically discrediting something because it's FHA or VA is worthy of you going and doing a little more research to understand the differences between the two. Is that fair to say?
Correct, I agree.
Perfect. All right. So last week I got the opportunity to sit down with, or not sit down, but be in a presentation with the chief economist of Fannie Mae. And he provided this slide here. And I thought this was a really interesting slide. And I'm going to let everybody kind of digest it for a minute. But he tracks home sales, interest rates, and unemployment data on the same graph. And he's tracked it since 1970. So obviously unemployment is the red line. The average fixed rate mortgage interest rate is the blue line. And then home sales is the bar chart, right? So what's interesting is at one point in time, you can see the interest rates back in 1982 were at 16%. And Rick, you've been around long enough. You probably were selling real estate then, no? Kidding.
I was about to say the same thing.
Y'all are killing me.
Oh, I'm just kidding with you. But anyway,
I came in 96. The perfect time to climb Mount Everest. Look at that.
There you go, right?
Who knew timing was that good?
But homes still sold, not at the same rate they sold in 2005, but they still sold, right? So then obviously mortgage rates started to make their climb down and home sales started to make their climb up, which is great for the US economy. But here's an interesting thing. So if you look in 2005, which was the peak of the home sales that we've seen in the history of the US housing market, what was the interest rate that year?
Looks like it's around 6,
5
right?
5 to 6%.
5 or 6%. So now the year we sold the most homes in the history of the US, interest rates were at 6%. And I point that out to say, we're pretty doggone low in interest rates right now. And the reality is we're going to see a little bit of an increase in interest rates going forward. And I think it's important to understand a perspective around that because our agents might panic the minute the rates start to go up. Or even your consumers might start to panic a little bit around rates going up. And if you understand the perspective, if rates go up to 3.5, how many years do you see on this chart where rates were even close to 3.5, right? None, only the last couple of years. So perspective is everything, especially around interest rates. I find unemployment to be interesting. Obviously the spike is around the pandemic, but the economy is staying under 6%, which tends to be a good statistic around unemployment, which we see as good, if not better, in Atlanta. But what do you guys see?
I see that it's still a great time to, again, to buy. When I looked at this graph, I had to think about what was going on in the 80s that people were paying over a 16% interest rate. Yet home prices were still, people were still buying homes. I don't think in any market it doesn't really matter what's happening. People have to buy and sell, but there's so much incentive right now to purchase just based on what the interest rates are now.
Yeah. And I also think another talking point, Toya, is we might actually see a little slight decline in home sales in 2022. But I can tell you, if you look at the last 10 years, even if we went backwards like 5%, we would be more than the last 15 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So perspective's everything. But we got to, as leaders and as industry experts and consumers, look to us for, data. And that's really what this call's about, is getting those talking points together so you have that perspective to consult people.
I love it.
I think one more data point that would be a really cool asset to have. One, recognition though, before I even jump into that, just realize this is global data. This is not hyper local. So the data, a lot of this is what drives consumer confidence or understanding, but it also hinges on what the media shares and how they depict this data. So be careful there. But the thought I had, I'm looking at it going, man, this is a great slide to show a buyer and go, so where do you see interest rates going? And the trend line, I mean, I don't know that it could get much lower. And at the same time, one more data point that would be helpful would be average sales price, because there's probably, I'm sure there's a correlation between the number of sales in the last 10 years and the average. We know what the median sales price has done. So that's the kind of the fourth piece of information that would be interesting from an investor's perspective.
Yep. The other thing that I'd like to share that I thought he said that I found really interesting, is he said, you're going to hear, and remember, this is the head guy at Fannie Mae. He said, you're going to hear in the media, and your consumers are going to hear in the media, bubble talk. And are we going to have a bubble, price appreciation? Because he predicted we're going to have slightly less home sales next year, but we're going to still see 15% price appreciation. And first of all, if you own real estate or you don't own real estate, that value, your net worth just went way up again next year, hopefully, if his predictions come true. But here's what he said. He said, you got to remember the previous bubble had to do with bad lending practices at 100% loans. And then the market was flat and people had zero equity in their house when times got tough. He said, you got to understand the amount of equity that was created over the last 24 months and going forward. Even if people have tough times, the equity in their house is so great that it would be really hard to pop that bubble. And, Jeff Morbido, I know you were in that same room with me. If you heard something different, please jump in. But I think that was a really interesting perspective talking about bubble, because, we've talked about it on this call, and I've certainly started to read it in the media news. And at the end of the day, I see his point around that equity in people's properties today really changes that conversation around could a bubble even pop? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
All right. So
it was such a great meeting because, I've had 3 people coincidentally over this week and say, I heard we're headed towards a recession. Things look really bleak. And I can honestly say, I sat in on a meeting with the chief economist for Fannie Mae on Friday, who says, stop worrying. There's more people and less houses. We are not going to crash.
Yeah.
So it was very powerful to be able to say that, we spoke to this guy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's powerful to keep
really
it
good.
simple in the response, that people can digest it and understand it. It's not a complicated algorithm.
Yeah. So everybody else is going to say they talked to Toya Stevenson, and she said, all right. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was, hang on, I have too many Zoom windows here. Urbanization. So Atlanta's a major metropolitan area, and this is a very real conversation for us in the sense that the city goes through cycles where people live in the city and then people move to the rural areas and then everybody moved back to the city. And what I found interesting is when the pandemic happened, it actually created a shift where people were moving out of the city, but I'm not sure it really created such a movement that Atlanta stopped dealing with the urbanization effect. And what I mean by that, if you look at this article in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, hang on, we got too many pictures here. There's a proposed development going in near Georgia Tech that is emblematic of Atlanta's density debate. And what they mean is, you know, you've got these old historic neighborhoods and they don't like the modernization of real estate where it's not a single family home, it's multifamily or townhome or high density development, which most major metropolitan cities are having to move to that kind of development in order to deal with the population growth, right? So I find it interesting. You might have thought that everybody had moved out to the burbs or onto some farmland or even to the beach, right, through the pandemic. But the reality is you're really starting to see some of the city develop with a lot of high density type development. And you're going to see the city combat that over the next couple of years, which I find pretty fascinating just to watch on the sideline. The last place I would want to be is that city council meeting.
Well, I was about to say, Rick and I, we probably undergoing the new building, even in the city of College Park. They are really looking at how do we keep it that it has the characteristic and feel that we're not getting into this, you know, high density area to where everything is modernized, but it takes away from old historic College Park. So even when we looked at the building and aesthetically, what did it bring? You know, there were some things that we took in consideration just to make sure that we were in alignment with what they're looking for.
Absolutely. And depending on what side of the fence you're on, right? Like maintaining the history is important and population growth is important too, right? So we're navigating that, and I'm not advocating either way. I just find it interesting to watch, and it's certainly a talk of Metro Atlanta around urbanization and how we deal with the population growth going forward. The last thing that I'd like to remind everybody is if you go to the Heart of Atlanta Group YouTube page, and on this YouTube page, you can click on playlists, and under playlist are all the industry updates we've ever done. Niali stores these every week, and you can go back and watch. We probably should put the dates on there, but I think you can see them in there somewhere. But anyway, we do post our industry updates every week. So if you happen to miss one or don't like watching it on Facebook, you can certainly go back to the YouTube channel. So any questions before we run out of here? Dates are listed in the description of the video, Niali says. She's the best.
She is.
All right. Well, happy Monday. Happy kind of holiday. I don't know. Anyway, talk to you next week.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a
Yes.
good one. Bye-bye.